Hi, this is Dr. Ogden, and today we're going to be learning about life and the tree of life. So, in biology, a lot of times we talk about what is it that defines life. And perhaps you would come up with some ideas like growth, reproduction, metabolism. But for each of these, I could also come up with an example where you have something that is clearly not alive, like crystals can grow, or cars can metabolize, and computer viruses can reproduce. That therefore demonstrate that any one of these by themselves may not be a good definition of what life is. Furthermore, maybe even a conglomeration of some of these is not a good way to define what life is. So I kind of like this idea. The fact that anytime you have something that has the ability to store and transmit information in the way of a genotype, and the ability to express that information to the environment in the form of a phenotype, and allows for descent with modification to occur, so evolution to occur generation after generation, then that is something that is alive. That may not be a perfect definition, but that's one that I kind of like when I think about what is life. So how did life begin? Well, there are different ideas, and of course some people espouse a religious idea, or some people even said maybe life came from extraterrestrial means and came here on inside of a meteor, and then from that point began to evolve. But the hypothesis that actually has the most support surrounding it is this origin, which is sometimes called the Operon-Haldane model, but many others have proposed parts of this or all of this into this origin of life model. And basically it has these parts. We know that Earth, way back 4.5 billion years ago, had these simple molecules, things like water, carbon dioxide, nitrogen gas, and so forth. And then these simple molecules could form complex polymers, things like nucleotides and amino acids. And then these nucleotides and amino acids could assemble themselves together into big long chains and form things like nucleic acids and proteins. And then these nucleic acids and proteins could assemble themselves inside of a membrane and be compartmentalized and separate from the outside environment. And at this point you basically have a simple cell. Then as long as it is producing a genotype, or as long as it has a genotype, so it has the information content, that produces a phenotype, so it expresses itself to its environment and has characteristics, and then can multiply itself and have descent with modification, so you have mutations and other mechanisms of evolution that come into play, then you have something that is alive. And this is the model that actually has the most support, and all different parts of this model have been reproduced in laboratories around the world. And so this is really kind of our best guess, best working model at this point as to how life came about on this planet. Now I want to make a point though, whether this model is correct or incorrect, whether life was placed here by some divine intervention or whatever, that is independent completely of the fact that evolution happens. Everything that we've discussed further, evolution happens regardless of how life originated on the planet. So the way that we look at this then is, again, the Earth was originated about 4.5 million years ago, and then went all the way up to, it took about 1 billion years before we had kind of the first forms of life. And we know this because we actually have fossils that are about 3.5 billion years old. So during this 1 billion years here is when all that process that I just talked about was going on. And for a long part of this, the Earth was still quite dynamic, and it wasn't until the Earth cooled enough to have a crust that was solidified and to have water that was standing and all of these other things to be able to kind of go through that early form where you create that common ancestor of all of life. And then since that point, things have been evolving. So I like to always just point out these dates. 4.5, origin of a life. 3.5, earliest, origin of Earth, and then 3.5, origin of life. And then at 2.5, another point that we can look at is that the atmosphere now, you start to get oxygen that is high enough, and so you get the first appearance of photosynthetic prokaryotes around this point as well. So those are kind of nice dates, a billion years that separates each of them. And then if you move to 2 billion years ago, you get the oldest eukaryotic fossils. So up until that point, for a billion and a half years, all that we had on the planet were prokaryotic life. But at 2 billion years ago, we get eukaryotic life, and then that continues to diversify. At 1.5 billion years ago, we have multicellular eukaryotes. And then at about 500,000 years ago, 500 million years ago, we basically get this huge diversification into most of the major body plans that are still alive on the planet today. So most of the major phyla that we have on the planet today originated about 500 million years ago.